Alright, so we're making our first project in Aptana, and we're going to be making a JavaScript project. To do that, we're going to need to make some HTML first. So this is going to be the HTML page. So what I've done is I've made a new file, so File, and under File I go to New, and File like that. And then I'm going to, we're inside Circles 2, and I'm going to choose circles.html like that. Okay, and so here we are. And I'm going to just put in my HTML code. So I'm going to start in by putting doctype. Okay, so it's a little exclamation point which says not doctype, and then HTML we type. And then we're going to put in our header. So we put in the little less than symbol. It's right beside the M, so it's above the comma, shift comma, and that opens up a tag. These are called tags, and we put in header, okay, which is what goes at the top of your HTML document. Okay, and as soon as you close it, it puts in the closing header as well. But we're going to need to put some more stuff between the two headers, the open header tag and the closing header tag. So I'm going to put in my script tag. So once I start spelling script, that'll come up, and you can finish spelling script, or you can just double click on it. Okay, and so inside the first script tag, so just after the T, before the greater than symbol, I'm going to put a space, and src is equal to circle.js. So what we're saying is that we're going to be looking for some script, right? Some code. And we're looking for a program for code inside a document called circle.js. The JS stands for JavaScript. Okay, and we're going to write that document. Okay, so that document doesn't exist yet, but it will. All right, so type is equal to text. So we're looking for a text document, and the type of text is JavaScript. Okay, and then that's that for the script. So I'm just going to put my cursor after the closing script tag and press return, and then I'm going to put in a link. Is equal to rel is equal to, and then quotes, style sheet, and then href is equal to, open quotes, circle.css, and then close quotes, and then we close the, whoops, and then we put in a slash and a close. Okay, and that is that. And then we put in our title link. So title, you can write title, and so it puts in a open not link, sorry, an open tag and a closed title tag. In between that, we put the title of our program, the title of our web page, which is going to be circles. Or circle, exclamation point. You can call it whatever you like, but since this is going to be about circles, I think the name circle describes it pretty well. Okay, so then I'm just going to return, and so this is what it should look like right now. And yeah, let's put it like that. Okay, and then I'm going to make something called a div. And what a div tag does is it kind of divides up the page. Okay. Div stands for division, right? Which is so the div tag divides up the screen basically. Okay, and so in the first one, we're going to put the ID is going to be equal to, I'm just going to make up a name, infosect. Okay, so this is the this division is just going to be the information section. Okay. And then, right after that, I'm going to put some instructions. So I'm going to have enter the radius of your circle here. So I'm about to run out of time on this first video. Stay tuned for video number 2. Okay, so I've just typed in the first part of the div infosect, right, which divides up the screen into various parts. So this is the part that's just going to be responsible for getting information or sending out information. So this part's just writing enter the radius of your circle. Okay, and then I'm going to make a little input text box. So input type equals text. Oops, type equals text in quotes. Name equals radius. Okay, and I'm going to use ID equals radius as well. ID equals radius. And class. Now class refers to a CSS or cascading style sheet class, which tells the box what to look like, how big the box is, the font and everything. So we can style up that box. We can make that text box look any way we like by using a CSS or using a class. Okay, and so the CSS class that we're using is called myAns for my answer. Okay, and then on change. So if that whatever's in that text box changes, what we're going to do is we're going to use a function called myInput. Okay, and that's going to be a function in JavaScript that we're going to write. Okay, and then what we want to do is we want to close that input tag. So we put the closing end of it. Okay, and that's that. Okay, so that gets us to the end of that that div, and then we're going to make another div, and this one is going to be, the ID of that one is going to be answers. And this is where it's going to give us the output, right? So it's going to give us, so what we're doing is we're entering the radius, and then it figures out the circumference and the area of the circle, and in the answers section or the div, it's going to give us those answers, okay? And that's why I name it answers. And so I'm going to div, and then what we're going to do is we're going to put a little paragraph, okay? And so the paragraph tag is a P. Okay, and I'm going to name that paragraph info. Oops, not name it, but name it. Info, and I'm going to give it an ID as well, which is the same thing. So I just copy and paste that. All right, and just close that tag up, and it gives us the closing tag for the P for the paragraph. Okay, and then we get to the close of that div. And then that comes the last thing. I like to put in this thing called a trace, okay? And this is something that I always put into my programs. And what this does is it just writes onto the screen whatever's happening in the program, okay? And I'll explain as we go along. So I'm just going to put in my div here. So div, and its ID is trace, like that, and then close that up, and then pretty much the same thing that we had up here. I'm just going to copy that. So the P name is going to be, I'm just going to call it trace1, and the ID will be trace1 as well. Okay, and after that we want to put in the body. So I put in the body tag like that, and between the open body and closed body, what I'm going to do is this is often where we put code. So for now, I'm just going to leave that blank, and that should be that, and I'm just going to close up the HTML. So I'm just going to put in a close HTML like that. Okay, and that's the HTML. So I'm just going to save that, and I'm going to run it and see what it looks like. Stay tuned for part 3. Okay, welcome to part 3. We've been working on the HTML. for our circle program. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to open up a web browser, and I'm going to go to File, Open, and I'm just going to go to where I saved my circle program. So circles 2, and now unfortunately I have a couple of HTML programs I have to get rid of. So I called it circles that I was just working on, and so I'm going to click Open. And here, okay, here's the program. It says enter the radius of your circle, and notice a couple of things. There's the name, circle, remember the title tag, and then it says enter the radius of your circle, and I'm going to enter the radius 10, and it should do nothing at this point. Okay, so if I press enter, nothing happens. All right, so the next step is we want to put in the JavaScript. Okay, so I'm just going to go back into my Aptana, and we're going to make a new file. So File, New, and it's just going to be a new file. And this is going to be, we're still in circles 2, and so I'm just going to name it circles.js. Okay, now the .js is for JavaScript, so make sure it's circles.js, and finish. All right, and then we just need a couple of things. I need a couple of functions. One is going to be the myInput function. I don't know if you remember that from the HTML. Let's go look at the HTML for a second. Remember on the input thing, that's where you put the radius. So in the input, we had this little command here that says onChange. Go to the function myInput. So we need to make a function called myInput. And also we need to make a function called trace, which is going to allow us to write what's going on in the program. Okay? So I'm just going to copy this myInput because I'm that lazy. And I go back here, and so I'm going to write the word function and myInput, and I need to make an open brace bracket. Okay, the open brace bracket is just beside the P. Okay, so shift and open brace bracket, and in Aptana it'll also make a close brace bracket. I'm just going to click in between those and press return. Okay, and then I'm going to put a little, I'm going to make a variable called rad for radius, and equals document dot get element by ID, and we're looking at the element radius. Okay, and then after that, dot value. So what that does is when myInput is called, it goes and it looks for that radius. We had a text box called radius. It looks for the text box and it returns the value. Okay. Now this is a variable, right? In math, you have variables. Think of a variable as like a box, a cardboard box, and it holds stuff. Okay. So this variable is going to hold the value of the radius. Okay. And always give your variable a meaningful name, like a name that describes what it does. So this is radius or rad, okay? Because you want to keep these things short. You don't want to be writing, 18 letters to name your variable. So I try and keep everything short. So rad, and then I want another variable called for circumference. So circumference. Okay, that's too long, right? So I'm just going to keep it short and just call it circ. Okay, and that is going to be, now remember the circumference of a circle is pi times diameter, right? And the diameter is 2 times the radius. So I don't want to make a new variable and call it diameter, so I'm just going to say pi times computer science. Now, of course, in math, pi goes on forever, but in computer science, you can only make it go so far. So we're about to run out of time again, so stay tuned for part 4. Have a good day. Okay, welcome to part 4. We're just building the Java functions, and so we're looking at function myInput, and we have the radius, and the radius is rad, var rad. It's our radius variable is equal to document.getElementById, and then in the brackets we have quote radius close quote close bracket dot value, and then we're just putting in our variable circ for circumference. Okay, so I call it circ. You can call it whatever you like, but make sure that the name describes what it does. And this is circumference. I just thought circumference is a bit long. So math.pi, okay, so that's pi is 3.14159. It goes on for a long time. Times the diameter, which is 2 times the radius, so 2 times rad, like that. Okay, and that's the variable. That's the circumference. All right, and then the area, var area, and that's going to be very similar. Area is pi r squared, right? So pi times radius times radius. Whoops, 2 equals. So my math times pi times, I'm just going to replace that 2 with another rad, like that. So that's the area. Okay, so the next step is, we have, what we want to do is we want to print out the result. Okay, so what we're going to do is we want to send the result to the that answers. Remember the div, the answers div? So we're going to send the result to that. Okay, so document dot get element by ID, oops, ID, and then quote answers, and then dot inner HTML, and the HTML is all caps, is equal to, and then I'm just going to write the circumference is, and then I'm just going to leave a space, and then after the quotations put a plus, circ. Okay, so it writes the circumference is, and then it writes the value for what the circumference is. Okay, plus, open quotes, space, units, period. Okay, just so that we can continue to see that, I'm just going to click on Control. I'm right-clicking on here, and I'm choosing Word Wrap. You can't see that, sorry. And that'll assure that when I get to the end of the line, it'll wrap around. Okay, units. And then what I want to do is write the area is, okay, close quotes. Oops, I had a close quote that I didn't need up there. Okay, so units. Okay, the area is, okay, and then close quote, put a plus, and then area, then plus, and then open quote, space, units squared. Okay, period, close quotes, semicolon. Okay, and then we're done. Okay, so that's that function. I'd also like to make a trace function. Now a trace function is really interesting. What it does is it just writes stuff out onto the page we're working on. It's very useful when you're programming to have some way of getting some feedback from your program. So if the program isn't quite working, you can see where it fails. Okay. So the function trace. Okay, and I'm putting, so this is a function and we're going to send it, this one was a function, we didn't send it an argument, and this one we're going to send it an argument, so we're sending it something. Okay, and the variable of that argument is just str, which stands for string. Okay, you can put, it doesn't have, you don't have to call it that, you can call it whatever you like. Okay, and then I'm going to put document element. Now instead of typing all that out, I can just copy that from up here, like that. And instead of sending it to answers, we're sending it to trace. And we have a div in the HTML called trace. And So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to write plus equals, and what the plus equals does is it adds the text value onto our trace value. Okay, so if our trace value says hi, and then we're sending it a text value of hello, how are you? So what it does is instead of replacing the hi with hello, how are you, it just adds it on. Okay, so that's what the plus equals does. We'll see a lot more of that as we get into the programming. Okay, so I'm putting a little space in front of it, plus the value of whatever we sent it, so str. Okay, and that's useful because what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a little call to the trace function up here. Okay, so as soon as we get into my input, I'm just going to say, I'm just going to write a little note saying we are in my input. We are in my, my input. Like that. And that's what the trace is going to do. It's just going to write that to the screen so we know that we're actually in that function. Okay? Alright, so that's the JavaScript. I'm going to add a bit more later on, but for now, that's all we need. And I'm going to make the CSS now. Okay? So I've got a little bit of CSS written right there. So, okay, we're going to enter the CSS. So the first thing I'm going to do is write at charset, open quotes, capital UTF, -8. Okay, which that's the 8, not A. That's the character set we're going to be using. Okay, put a semicolon after that, and then a little dash and star. This is a little comment saying that this is going to be a CSS document. Not document, but document. And space, star, slash. Okay, so this stuff up here just tells the compiler what character set we're using. And this tells us that this is a CSS document, in case we didn't know. Okay, dot, my ans, okay, that's for my answer, is going to be, this describes what it looks like. Okay, so I'm going to write font dash family. Okay, so this is what the font looks like. And so we have all kinds of choices down here, and I'm going to go with, let's see, you can pick any one you like. I have a particular favorite that I like. So I'm going to just choose that. No, I'm not going to put that in quotes. I'm going to put trebuchet and comma sans serif, like that. Okay, and the color. Okay, no U1 color because it's American is, let's say, blue. Okay, the font size is 18 pixels. PX. And the width is, let's say, 100 pixels. And the height, I'm not going to worry about the height. I'm going to put text align is right, so we can choose right, left, or center. Okay, and that's that. Okay, the next part I'm going to put is, okay, I'm doing the number sign and info sect. Okay, and then position is absolute. So this will tell us like where stuff is. Okay, whereas this part, it shows us what, this class shows us what things look like. Okay, like colors and stuff. All right, and position absolute, and top is 200. Is 20 pixels. And we're about to run out of time again, so stay tuned for the next part. Have a good day. Z index. Okay, the position just tells you, position absolute tells you that you can tell the object where to be on the screen. Okay, There's absolute or position relative. Relative is relative to the stuff that comes before it. Okay, so basically you put stuff on the screen and it just comes after what came before it. Absolute is, this is where I want you to be. I absolutely want you to be at 20 pixels from the top, 200 pixels from the top, like down 200 pixels, and 20 pixels from the left. So I want it to appear right here, kind of thing. Okay, Z-index tells you like how layered you are. Okay, so a Z-index of 1 is you have to be the first thing that I see. Okay, if something has a Z-index of 2, it's going to be the second thing. So the higher the Z-index, the further down the screen it is. Like if you're talking about layers, imagine you have a whole bunch of transparencies, like transparent plastic sheets, and you've drawn something on each sheet, okay, and they're layered. Okay, so if you have something is Z-index 1, it means it's first. It's the first sheet. If it's Z-index 10, which I'm going to put down 10, it's going to be the 10th sheet. Okay, so that's what Z-index means. And okay, and then the next thing I'm going to put in for my answer section. Okay, answers, and then I'm just going to copy this code. It's all going to be very similar, and I'm just going to change position is absolute. Top is going to be 300 pixels. Left, I'm going to use 50 pixels, and Z-index, I'm going to make it 11. Okay, and so then I'm going to put in my trace, which is once again going to be very similar. So I'm just going to copy all that, trace, and change the top to 600, and the left to 50, which is fine. And the Z-index I'm going to make 12, let's say. Okay, so now we have the CSS, we have our JavaScript, and we have our HTML. Let's see if that works. Okay, so here I am in my browser, and what I do is go to File, Open File, and I go to, so mine's in this little folder called Circles 2, and I'm just going to click on the HTML, and now I have 2 of them, so I have to get rid of this one. But this is the one I'm looking for, so I just click on it, and it says enter the radius of your circle, and I'm going to write 10 and press return, and right away, do you remember that trace? It says we are in my input. And this is neat, and this is very useful because the program didn't work. Okay, so when I pressed 10, I pressed enter. The program didn't work, but the trace worked. Okay, so I know that the program's working at the beginning of the my input function. So let's go and look at the my input function and see if we can find the error. Okay, so here we are, my input. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the trace. I'm just going to write 1. I'm just going to change this to 1. And then I'm going to just keep pasting that. So 1, 2, 3. And then I'm going to put a trace down here to say that we're finished in my input. So my input, I'm just going to write done. My input. All right, so let's save that and run it again. So go back to the browser and press the refresh button. Okay, and I'm going to write 10. Okay, so we are in my input. So it doesn't get past the first step. Notice the 1 doesn't show up. All right, so let's go and see why that's not working then. So var rad document get element by ID. Okay, let's try that one. So save that. 10, and look at that. Okay, so now I press return and it gives me the answer. The circumference is 62.83185.307. It goes on forever units, and the area is 314.15 units squared. Okay, and then the trace says we are in my input 1. Okay, so the things I want you to notice is, well, one, there's a couple of things. There's where it says the circumference is 62.8318530.7, and it goes on for quite a while. That can be a bit tiresome, so maybe we want to round that. And this is it's kind of ugly. All right, so what we want to do is we want to pretty this up. We want to use a bit of color. We want to make the color, change the background color, make the text appear nicer. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to do some of that. That's all going to be in the CSS, but except for the rounding part. So let me just show you how to round. It's very simple. So right here, what I'm going to do is where the circumference is math times pi times 2 times radius, I'm going to use another math function called round. Okay, but watch what happens. So math dot round. Okay, let's see if that works. So I'm going to save that. Remember what the answer was, 62.83. Let's see what this does. If I put 10 again. 63. Okay, it's rounding it way too much. So let's say I only wanted it to round to 2 or 3 decimal places. Okay, so what I need is I need a function that's going to round it to the right place. Okay, so I'm going to make a function to do the rounding, because right now rounding, it just chops it off. It chops the decimal off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new function. Also, you might want to use a little bit of I'm going to use a comment just to separate my functions. Alright, so to make a comment, I just make a double slash, and then this isn't really a comment, this is just a separator. So I'm going to use that to, just so I can visually see where one function begins and where one ends. Okay, but comments are very useful. So, like for example, the trace function, I could put a comment to say this function writes the programmers writes your thoughts on the screen. Okay, so the comments are little messages to you, so as the programmer, so you know what everything does. Okay, because what happens is you know what everything does today, but let's say you go back and you look at the program 6 months from now, the little comments will tell you what you were thinking, or how the program works. Okay, so we're going to make a new function, and I'm just going to copy this function because I'm that kind of lazy. And this new function is going to be, I'm going to call it myRound. Okay, there's already a function called round. I'm going to call this one myRound. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to send this one 2 arguments. I'm going to send it the number, which I'm going to call num, and I'm going to send it the, let's say, the number of places to round to. So I'm going to call this place. Okay, and the comment is this function rounds numbers. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, now if I wanted to round it, let's say to 0 decimal places, so I just round it. Okay, but if I wanted to round it to the 1 decimal place, what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply the number by 10, round it, and then divide the number by 10. Okay, and that'll get it back to where we started. If I want to round it to, let's say, 3 decimal places, I'm going to multiply it by 1,000, right? So I want to move the decimal place 3 spaces. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the place, and that's going to be the power of 10 that I'm going to be multiplying the number by. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use, okay, to make a power of 10, I'm going to use, math.pow. Okay, and then open bracket. Now, what we do is we put in the number, okay, so num, and then comma. Oops, it's not the num, it's the place. So I want 10 to the power of whatever the place is, so 10, sorry, and then the place. Okay, so if this was 2, I'm going to get 10 to the power of 2, which is 100. Okay, and that's going to be what I'm going to multiply my num by. Okay, so I'm going to make a variable. I'm going to call this new num is equal to math.pow. I just noticed a couple of things weren't working. One
is hold on a second. Restart. Okay, notice everything's bunched up near the top. And then when I enter, okay, so we have the output is right here, right directly below the input. And then the trace all happens down here. Everything's very squished up. Okay, but if you look in the CSS, it says that the trace, the top position of the trace is at 600 pixels down. Okay, and the answer is at 300 pixels down. Alright, this is not 600 pixels down. 600 pixels down is like way down here, way down below where you can see. Okay, so it means it's not following the CSS. So let's go and have a look at why. Okay, very common mistake. CSS looks fine, there's no errors in the code. If I go into the HTML, right away I noticed a couple of things. Well, really one thing is that you see the way the CSS file, its name is spelled circles.css. Okay, and up here it says Cirlook, and it's just misspelled. So make sure it's spelled exactly the right way. .css, save it, and then run. Okay, notice right away the info, the input area comes way down. I put in the 10, and then here's the output. It's down a bit further, and way down here, I'm going to have to scroll down to get to it. I have the trace, and you can't even see it on here. I'm going to have to shrink the page. Okay, and here, let me scroll down. There it is. Okay, so quite far down. That's the 600 pixels down. Okay, and there it is. Alright, so now everything is working as it should. Alright, if everything's squished up in the top, it means the CSS is not working. Alright, and that should be it for now. Have a good day.